about our country. And we have with us Okay, so good evening, all of you. Welcome to this wonderful show, Know Your Roots. It's an interesting and very valuable opportunity to learn about the true legacy and heritage of our country. And we are very fortunate to have with us two amazingly gifted scholars, Dr. D.K. Hari and Dr. D.K. Hema Hari. And thank you so much, both of you, for joining us on this wonderful show. We can have them join us now. Dr. D.K. Hari and Dr. D.K. Hema Hari. So both of them hail from a management and IT professional background, and they have founded this organization known as Bharat Gyan, which was initially conceptualized for a civilizational study, but in its present form, they have done extensive amount of research with respect to traditions, culture, and global ties of ancient Indian civilization, with the connecting it with the Indian perspective. And both of them have left their lucrative professional careers to turn into research scholars to conceptualize and find Bharat Gyan. They have published over 27 books, over 5 documentaries, as well as many short films that span a worldwide spectrum of disciplines. So, welcome all of you into this fantastic session. And we have with us now Dr. D.K. Hari and Dr. D.K. Hema Hari.
Namaste.
Great. Namaskaram. Thank you so much for joining us for this wonderful opportunity. Because spending close time with children, I feel that children and youth of today and the future of our country should really understand about the roots where we come from. So since the theme of this session is conceptualized on Know Your Roots, I would like to begin by asking, what are the real roots for the Indian civilization? And since there are many theories around it, we would like to hear from you. This is your research.
See, the roots actually go back very deep and very ancient. And when you ask this question about roots, there is a very old kahavat. Okay, it's actually in Tamil language, Kannada, Telugu, all languages. It is called Rishi Moolam, Nadi Moolam.
You can never trace them.
You can never trace
Yes.
them. This is the source of the river. Is not just one point, but multiple points. You may have a Gangotri, Yamunotri, but there are multiple origins for Ganga or Yamuna or Kaveri or any river or Krishna.
And also, more importantly, it's not just this flow. See, where will you say is the source of water? It goes up and it comes down again onto earth. So, which is the real source?
Right.
Similarly, for rishis,
Which is the
who are
source?
all
Because it
people, again, it's like that.
right.
So yes,
Okay.
that's why we've written a book called Roots in India. You can see that.
Okay.
So the book
Okay.
deals
That
with a
published
variety of
version
items that have roots in India.
Right.
Okay, go
Right.
ahead, please.
So the next question relates to this because the academic history that we are taught in schools doesn't seem to correspond and highlight the aspects that you just mentioned. And of course, for the perspective and the future generation builds their perspective basis what they study in the academic history. How can we, as people of India, ensure that our future generation truly experiences and respects the legacy of real Bharatvarsha?
There are two things to it. There is a saying that history is written by the victors.
Correct.
I'm sure all of you have heard it. The youngsters would also heard it. There's another twist to it, we can say, another nicer way of looking at it. History is not what is right, but
Right.
what is left. That is, in a battle between two people, those who are left At the
Yeah.
end of the battle, they're in the history.
So it need not be right.
It is what is left.
Left.
Very
And more
interesting.
so in terms of India.
More so in terms of India. So,
Very well
The
so.
left is too much of meaning in that.
so that's how it has all come about to us. But the key point is, see, history, the very word history comes from a Greek book written about 500 BCE. It's
Right.
called Historia, the
Yeah.
name of the book. Huh? And
Yeah.
the word comes from that, obviously. And from there on, it's come. So
Yeah.
it is a very, the perspective is very limited in that. And that is what has come through of only kings, names, their times,
Right.
whichever century they lived in, and the battles they
Yes.
fought, the battles they won, the battles they lost, which kingdom, all that. Whereas in the Indian thought, if you look at it, what you call Purana or Itihasa, the
Yes.
focus is more on knowledge and the values that those times presented to the civilization. It was more
Right.
value based than chronology based,
Right.
because in the historiography of the West, let's recognize they have only two sets of historiography that's for 700 years each.
Two
Right.
periods.
Two
And
periods.
periods.
One
Right.
is from 350 BCE, that is a little before Alexander, when times when history was written, to
Yes.
350 CE, when Constantine became the king of southern Europe.
Right.
So that's for 700 period. After there's a big gap, it's called Dark Ages.
Mm-hmm.
Then comes Renaissance around 1350,
Yes.
1400, from which again history starts in Europe again.
Right.
So in ancient history, they have 700 years. In modern history, they have 700 years. So two windows of 700 years is their history. So they have to speak about battles won, battles lost, king name,
Right.
and the kingdom, all that. So the focus is very
Right.
clearly historiography. Whereas if you look at Indian thought, it's a continuous history of 7,000 plus years, 10
Correct.
times more. And and historians who lived 7,000 years back have said the futility naming the names of the kings and the battles they won and lost. Because there are hundreds of kings and thousands of battles fought. No use
Right.
naming them, no use of their dates. Whereas what is more important is the good that they did for the
Right.
people and the values they stood for is what the historiography angle of Indian history has been. Unfortunately, today we are taught the historiography angle of European history. The historiography itself is different, not just the history. So
Right.
that is a paradigm shift. About this, we have written in our book, Breaking the Myths.
Oh.
It's a full chapter in our book, Breaking the Myths.
And
Yeah.
we had actually 22 styles of recording.
Mm-hmm.
And of all these 22, some of the major ones that we are comfortable with today are the Purana and then the Itihasa. And there are only
Yes.
two Itihasa, which are actually the history in that sense, like if you want to equate it with whatever we have in modern
Sense of
history.
linearity, if you wish to give to it,
Yes,
like the way they have in Europe and
modern
West.
present day
Yes.
history text.
I think they're limited. Their purview is limited to the first level of existence. So that's why so much attention
There's
is
actually
given.
a book in Kashmir. It's called Raja Tarangini,
Okay.
written by a person named Kalhana,
Anji.
that has survived the onslaught.
Oh.
Okay, that book actually, if you want history, that book gives you the historiography of Kashmir for a few millennia. That's a wonderful book. We have mentioned about that book in our book, Historical Krishna. We have shown the book cover and the details.
Okay.
It's called Raja Tarangi. That follows to some extent that style.
Oh.
Similarly, there have been such documents in different kingdoms.
Yes.
Unfortunately, due to the constant pillage and plunder of different parts of India,
Right.
similar historical texts like Raja Tarangini are now lost in most other parts.
Unfortunately.
But many parts still have them. For example, Manipur, Tripura, all have their kings list.
Right.
The battles
Thank
they
you
won,
so
it's
much.
all available.
Thank you. We do have Sanjay ji who has joined us from Maharashtra. So Sanjay ji also has a couple of questions to ask. Welcome to the show Know Your Roots, Sanjay ji. You may please proceed.
We can't hear you, sir. We can't hear him.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, now. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. I was saying I'm more of a process person, so I wanted to know from you, how do you drive your passion to learn so much in history, and how can we make history interesting for the next generations of children and teens?
Good question. See, we are not historians ourselves.
And we also say history is too serious a subject to be left to historians.
So don't leave this to it. And today we see some of the major developments in history of Indian thought has not been brought about by the historians at all, or by the Indian History Congress. None of them have had major contributions in, for example, the bringing back of the Saraswati Rivers research has not been done by the historians. Bringing back of the
Demolishing the Aryan myth.
Aryan myth has not been done by the mainstream historians, so-called MA, BA, PhD, MPhil historians, or the Indian History Congress. So they have actually, in that way, failed in the role they were supposed to play. So it is the common people like yourself and ourselves who are interested to know about our civilization. We have all, over the last 100 years, each of us have contributed in our own way. And that corpus is today enormous. It's totally non-government funded, non-university funded, private, quality, high quality research, which is cumulatively added up, today standing the test of time. That is what it is. And each of us have to contribute our bit to it, continue to. That's how it should be. Not depend only upon government largesse or government grants.
Okay.
And so long as you keep looking at it as history, it will still be there. The moment we start taking ownership and say it's my story, then the truth will come out.
That's the difference.
So let's not limit it to history. For example, if you look at what we are doing in Bharat Gyan, we are doing it, look at it from a much larger perspective called civilization studies.
Okay.
So civilization is a much larger perspective to explain. So history is one component of civilization. Anthropology is another component. Economics is another component. Each of these components cumulatively make up the civilization.
And there is one other aspect, we were just discussing before, how the Indian history really goes way back in time. And it is not just the details of battles, and the largeness of the time span also means you have to involve various disciplines. And for instance, especially when we are looking at the history of Rama and Krishna, which mainstream history doesn't even want to touch, you find that you have to rely a lot on astronomical references in the text. There is, and map it with archaeological references you see on the ground, and map it with other literary references and inscriptions that you find all over India and so on. So it's becoming a more multidisciplinary approach Therefore, the concept of what means history and studying history, if it just means memorizing the dates and keeping those in mind, and when looking at things from that perspective, then it really doesn't serve the purpose here.
That's what I was coming to. Going back to your thing, so it's like, it's not just history.
One more thing I want to add, it makes it very interesting.
Sure.
History becomes interesting then, because when you start using so many subjects, then there is scope for so many more children to get involved in history.
So because when you do cartography, you need chemistry. When you do archaeoastronomy or planetarium software, you need physics, you need astronomy, so many other subjects. So history is becoming interdisciplinary, what we call.
Got it.
Yes, Sanjay ji, go ahead.
Yes, coming back to your thing. So if you look at holistically the entire civilizations, do you think the ancient civilizations were more civilized than the modern day civilizations?
Good question. See, what is more civilized is a big question. That is a very big question. What is civilized? What is being civil is a big question. Okay,
right.
If you look at America today, it's supposed to be a civilized land. Look at the rioting going on the streets, especially today in about 18-20 cities. Is that civilization? Is a big question mark. Is owning a cell phone a civilization? a big question mark. So let's recognize that for the times, the century you're in, for the decade you're in, if you know how to live with values, live as humane, not just as a human, but humane, and learn to respect each other, and not just tolerate. See, myself, you are yourself. Okay, I'll just tolerate you. See, that's actually a very okay. I am high, you are low. I'll tolerate you. So tolerance was a word that was used a century back. It's no more. I don't want you to tolerate me.
Right.
If I allow you to be your way, you should allow me to be my way. If I respect you, you should respect me back. I don't say you tolerate me back. So
Right.
tolerance is not a very limited perspective there.
And when you say respect, it's not just limited to each other alone. So if you actually look at it, ancient civilizations respected nature more.
Got it. Okay.
So their responsibility towards nature and sustainability was much higher than what we have today. So the benchmark shifts totally. So then who do you call more civilized? So the definition of civilized has to first be defined and only then compared.
See, 30 years back, 40 years back, you'd have told me plastic is a wonder product and it has come to change the way of life. 40 years down the line, is plastic really a wonder product? Is a question. It was a very civilized product. Okay?
Right.
100 years back, they said big dams, this dam, that dam, the Three Gorges Dam, Aswan Dam, Mississippi Dam, all the big dams, they said big is good. Now they are saying small is beautiful. So these shifts keep happening. So it's a question of big versus small. Actually, in our book Future from India, there's a full chapter that deals with this big versus small in relation to civilization.
And until all this shift and this fluctuations, the flux will keep happening until and unless your values are fixed. So unless you know what your goal is to be, you're going to be doing this trial and error and just keep shooting in the dark. And if you go from that perspective, the Indian civilization were very clear about their goal. The value system was very clear. The priorities in which things had to be addressed was also very clear and given the framework called dharma. So that way, if you look at it, everything was very clear. And the definition of what is the meaning of civilization was also very clear. So then it's very obvious then who was more civilized.
See, what is dharma? Then she's used the right phrase. What is dharma? If you look at the tiger, a tiger's dharma is to kill a goat and eat. That's its dharma, nothing wrong in it. But it's not the dharma of you and me to kill a goat and eat. Isn't it? Our dharma is different. Right. And the dharma of the sun is to give you light and heat. I know it's hot in summer, especially in some of the places it's 45 degrees, 47 degrees. It's very hot. So, but it's the dharma of the sun to give you the heat. Like that, each has a place in the dharma. That is what is to be in sync with nature. See, sync with nature is SYNC, sync with nature. Unfortunately, what we have thought, we have changed the spelling to SINK.
And we are syncing.
Syncing with nature.
We are not sync with nature. We are syncing nature and sync with.
So that's it's all a question of how you look at the spelling of the word sync now.
Right.
Very validly said. Thank you, Sanjay ji. Thank you so much for asking those questions. We do have some children also who have joined us from across the country. Next, we have Bhagwan, who is a 9th standard student connected from Mandi, Himachal Pradesh. Mandi, again, is a very spiritual place, as we all know. So, Bhagwan, over to you. Please ask your first question that you want to ask.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, ma'am. I'm Bhagwan Malhotra from Mandi, Himachal Pradesh, a grade 9 student. So my first question is, what was the difference between ancient teenagers and modern teenagers in terms of distraction, their priorities, and their other lifestyle?
Can I answer this in a simple way? Do you know Adi Shankara?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
You know one of his very famous poems? It's called Bhajagovindam. You can just see it on YouTube. It's one of his most popular songs, poems is Bhaja Govindam. In that, what does he say? Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Govindam Bhaja Modamate. There, the next line he says, Tarunastavat Taruni Saktaha. The youth, the teenagers will be taking part only in teenage-related activities. So, in Adi Shankara's time, 2500 years back, the Tarun and Taruni were interested in their teenage. So it's valid even today. So, so see, across 2500 years, the observation of one great saint, and he says it is the most popular Bhajagovindam, Tarunastavat Taruni Saktaha. Vriddhastavat Chinta Magnaha. Vriddha means old. When you get old, you are so much worried in problems. Pare Kopini. Okay, so that's a point. So nobody thinks of the divine. So you should understand that. So, and similarly, Socrates in Greece, he makes a statement that the youth there are, that is 2300 years back, he makes a statement. The youth are of today are not like the youth that were in my days of youth. That is 50 years before his time.
Right.
So
that comparison is always there.
Okay. So the idea of good old days is always there. So the point is, we have immense faith in the youth of this land, the Tarun of this land, who will do this land proud and keep the civilization going proud. That's the beauty of this land. Every successive generation have contributed to the fabric of this land in wonderful ways, in their own ways. And you, when you get old, 50 years, 70 years later, when you get in your 60s and 70s, you will speak of the same thing about youth who are going to be 2 generations after you. Okay? That's a continuous thing. It's like the waves coming in the sea. Okay? And that's the beauty of civilization.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Bhagwan. We do have a tech guy who works in Oracle Bangalore, Vivek Ji. He's joined us, and he also has certain questions. So from a youth perspective, let us hear what are his concerns. Vivek Ji, please ask your question.
Very good evening to you, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening.
As a child, I used to be very fascinated with history. I used to read the history textbook like a storybook, and all images used to form in my mind. I used to wonder, the Marathas and all of them, that we read about. I'm curious about one thing, is there, you can throw some light, on what might have happened to the Kauravas? I mean, where are their descendants, or the Pandavas, where are their descendants? Is there something that, we know about them?
I'll answer this question to you, okay? In the book Ayodhya War and Peace, which is available, it's published by Art of Living, the book is there. We have traced the descendants of Lava and Kucha.
Okay.
And Sant Guru Nanak and Sant Guru Gobind Singh were both descendants. One was a descendant of Lava and the other was a descendant of Kucha. That's the Vedi and the Sodhi clan. That is Sant Guru Nanak, when he goes, he was probably the last Sant to visit Ram Janmabhoomi before it was destroyed by Babur and his General Mir Baki. This is why Sant Guru Nanak says that to his disciple Bhai Mardana, who is a Muslim by birth, he tells him, look here, I have come to my ancestral home. That is, he goes to Rama's house and he says, I'm visiting my ancestral home. Because he claims, his family claims descendants from Lava and Kucha. So directly, so like that, the families are all over. So because between the time of Sant Guru Nanak, that's about 500 years ago, in early 1500s, to the times of Rama, there's a gap of about 6,500 years. It's a long time. Similarly, so people are spread all over. Because see, Sant Guru Nanak, the Vedi and the Sodhi clan are in Punjab. And Punjab to Ayodhya is at least about many hundred kilometers away. So they're dispersed and traveled over time. Similarly, in the case of the Pandava clan, you have the story. The children of Abhimanyu become the kings. Okay, Janmejaya, Daksha, all of them become kings. Parikshit, Janamejaya, Taksha. So there's clear lineage there on for it. And they are all obviously here part of us in flesh and blood. Their DNA is here with us today. So they are not some mythological figures. When the descendants of Lava and Kucha are with us today in different parts of India, okay, similarly the descendants of the Pandavas are also here very much with us. See, the Kauravas, most of them were killed. So obviously you're not going to get much descendants of the Kauravas. But in the Himachal, high hills of Himachal, in some remote villages, you have some tribes who still claim descendants from Duryodhana. It's there. Okay, you can check it out on Google. You will get there the names of the village and how to access them, all that. And because they have their own practices which they practice. Instantly, if you see, there are some districts in East Rajasthan who they call as Srimali Brahmins. We mentioned this in Ramayana and Lanka. You can check it out. The Srimali Brahmins claim descendants from Ravana.
I see. Oh, wow.
And even today, for Vijayadashmi, while you do Ravan Dahan, okay, in the Ramlila Maidan, and you take it to be joyous, they do Tarpan
I
on
see.
the
Ravan.
day. So it is a day of happiness for them, but it's a day of sadness for them because the greatest son of their Kula died that day.
Interesting.
So look at it, how this and funnily also we have said in our book both historical Rama and historical Krishna, the 32nd generation from Rama, a person by name Brihad Bala, king of Ayodhya, he fought in the Kurukshetra battle on the side of the Kaurava
Oh,
and was killed by Abhimanyu in the Chakravyuha.
interesting.
So there's a continuous lineage. So it's very much available, all this.
Yeah. In fact, I was reading somewhere that the Jews are actually they have a connection with the Yadavas. When before the Dwarka it submerged, some of the Yadavas escaped and they are actually the Jews. I mean, I don't know how far.
Yeah, good. We have written a mini book called Indo-Israel, a Connect or Millennia. It is there in a website. You can go check it out.
Okay.
It's about 40 plus pages. We've written about the
Thank you.
Indo-Jew Connect. You can go check it out. It's there.
Yeah. Because the names are also pretty similar, like
Thank you so
Brahma
much.
and
Thank you,
Abraham.
Vivekji, for that question.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, it is. It is the
Exactly, yes.
Don't stop with Brahma and Abraham. Look at their wives' names.
What is the consort of Brahma
Saraswati.
and what is the consort of Abraham?
Sarah.
That's all.
Yeah, that's what.
So Saraswati. So you remove the
Yeah.
later suffix. It's the same.
But even though there is a similarity in the name, there is a big difference in the ideology behind. This one is Brahmic. This is Abrahamic. Abraham.
Abraham.
They're all Brahman. This is Brahman. So that is a major difference between the civilization and the culture and mindset of India and Eastern civilization and those of the West.
West Asia. What is actually West Asia? Because what you call as Middle East, Far East is all the term itself is in correlation from America. So why should we take an American perspective to discuss an Indian idea? So we call it West Asia, which is a better term. Okay, we have written about that in this book, Indo-Israel.
Thank you.
It's about 40 pages. It's available for free read in our website. You can check it out.
Under mini book.
Definitely.
And a mini.
Definitely.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you so much. We do have a young girl who has joined us from Hyderabad, Namya. She has some interesting questions to ask you as well.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, ma'am.
Namya.
Okay. So my question is, there is a theory that Jesus once lived in India. Is there any? What's the research say about this?
Quite a few people have written books on this. Not us in Bharatgan, but a whole host of others which you read. Very well researched, nice books, including I think our friend Ashwin Sangh has written a book called Rosabelle Line. To many other people have written. Okay, because there is about a 12-year gap. We don't know where Jesus went. There's a lost years or the unknown years. So he could have welcomed India, but you have something of him going to Egypt for 7 years. That is documented. Whereas before that, you don't have where he went. So in all probability, he could have come to Kashmir, which was where he came to study with the knowledgeable people, because Kashmir was a big center of learning then. Okay, because the word Kashmir itself comes from Kashyapa. And the word Kashyapa, he is the father of both the Deva and Asura. Okay, both Diti, the divisible and the non-divisible. Diti means divisible. Aditi means non-divisible. So both the divisible and non-divisible, he is the originator for. So Kashmir is the place where all the knowledge repository was there. So obviously people could have traveled from West Asia across Persia, which was a very prominent civilization then, and come and spend some years talking to all the rishis and all that. Here, that was very common, because 300 years before the time of Jesus, when Alexander came to India, his teacher, then Aristotle, he asked Alexander only for one thing. When you go to India, you'll meet a lot of wise rishis there. Treat them with respect.
And if you can, please bring some of them back with you.
So that I would like to interact with them.
So they were well aware that India was a land of knowledge. There were a lot of scholars here, and they were keen on discussing with these people. So it is very possible that Jesus also would have had that thirst in
him. This is 300 years before Jesus. What she says is right. So could have come one. So that she said, no, that particular rishi name in India, he is called Kalyan. It's a very common name. In Greek, it's called Kalanos. He was the rishi who was taken, and of course he went up to Babylon when Alexander died, and his followers took him there. Okay, to meet the various people in Greece. So, but also you have a tomb in Kashmir, which most people there locally believe, it's for the Isa. They think it is the tomb of Jesus, because the word J doesn't exist. J is a very English component to it.
Which is typically ya.
Yeah, Yeshu.
Sound. Yesu.
Yesu or
Isa.
Yeshu.
Even Jehovah is actually Yehovah, Yahweh. And there you see actually in the Jew thing, Yahweh and Indra, you find a lot of connect.
So it's Yahweh. There's no vowel in it. So it's only all the consonants. Yahweh. Okay, YWHW. That's very interesting. So that is the Indo-Israel connect, actually, Yahweh, and it's there in the Veda. This name comes for Indra. So that is there, and there's a good probability. And I have come across at least 10 different authors who written extensively on this particular aspect of Jesus coming to India.
Okay.
And having lived, each one of them have done enormous research. I'm sure if you have the time, you don't have to read every one of them. At least you can browse through a few of them. So you'll get a fair idea. And I think there's something called Rosabelle Line. Different books are there. Jesus lived in India, different books. Okay?
Okay.
Good?
So the next question is, when did the beautiful system of Varna transmography into caste system, how do we reverse that process?
Good question. Caste system never existed in India. Caste system was imposed on India by the British when they did the caste census of India in 1870. The word caste comes from the Portuguese word casta, which means to race, R-A-C-E, race of people. And I talked about this in the book about breaking the myths about society. 1/3 of the book, at least about 100 pages, deals with the subject of this caste system. She has written beautifully. What we had before that, because caste system is an imposition by the British. That's point one. Point two, what we had was something called Jati Varna. She'll explain to you about that.
See, just look at these two words, jati and varna. So jati, the root is ja, which means birth, janam, janani, ja is to be born. So jati means that community into which you are born. All right. So what defines this community? Actually, if you go to look at it, this is more to do with the genetic material that determines the community. So the jati was something that was preserving your genetics. Now the varna, if you look at the word, it comes from the root var, to select, to choose. And that is why you have color, which color is called varna, because color is something you choose. I want red, I want blue, I want green. So out of you choose. Color gives you that facility to choose. And that's why, you know, when your parents were duna, right? When you grow up. So they'll be saying var, they'll be going for a var, something that you can select. And that time you can do swayam var. You can say my choice. Okay, this is my choice, swayam var. So varna was something that you could choose. So you were born into one genetic group, but you could choose what profession you wanted to do. So did you want to be in the knowledge profession? Did you want to be in administrative and defense? Did you want to be in trading? Or did you want to be in manufacturing? Which are predominantly the four things that we have even today. Manufacturing and service industry, or you have the business, trading industry, or you have administrative services and defense services, or you have the education services. So it's pretty much the same thing. And people, the thing was, because of this varna, the idea of var, people could choose, they could be in any one of them and they could move to the other, provided that industry was willing to accept them, which is again same as today. If you might be a great teacher, but then if you decide one day I'm going to do business and you're not skilled enough for business, then you're going to fail there. So that is exactly how the system was. The difference was in the Varna Jati system, there was also, it was a ashrama system also, which was around it. So whatever Varna you were, this is how you had to behave. So as a teacher, your conduct had to be like this. If you think this doesn't suit you, fine, go become something else. Or if you were a military person, then your conduct should be like this. If this doesn't agree with you, then you choose out of these four what suits you. And if you are a failure across all of this, then your jati, your community would support you. They never let you out. That was the safety net which the jati system gave. So you lived with your jati, you married in your jati, you lived and ate like your jati, and fundamentally your jati was your nest egg. But then you could go and do what was, your inclination, which is almost the same as today, except that we don't have that good framework with which we can work to the best of our abilities in each of these four kinds of profession.
I'll take an example. After she explained so beautifully, I'll take an example for you. Today, you're a student, right? So you're a Brahmana today. 10 years later, you want to go into the bank. You want to work in a bank in the field of finance. What will you become? A Vaishya. Okay? 5 years later, after that, you'll suddenly want to get into administration, politics, or something like that. You want to lead the country, you want to get into politics. Then what do you become? You become a Kshatriya. Then 5 years after that, you'll say, no, I want to get back into learning knowledge. Because I like knowledge. I've done business, I've done finance, I've done politics. That's all enough for me. Now I want to get back into.
I want to be a teacher.
Teacher again for life. So what do you become then? You become a Brahmana. So that's where you choose and migrate across years, across in your life. So you can become and if you go into the field of manufacture, services and all that, then you become a Shudra. So you grow things for people.
But you know what? There is something very interesting which often people misconstrue. Since there are a lot of children here, I want to explain this idea. Take a little bit of time. See, normally people will say, they'll use this word dvija, and then they will say that it was Everybody else other than the Shudra were called the Dvija. That means they were twice born, and the Shudra alone were not twice born. So they'll use these words in a very wrong sense and build up a whole big booth, What we have to understand is, see, the idea of learning, academics, or if you talk about administration and defense services, how to use military equipment and all of that, the idea of commerce, trade, dealing with currency, economics, all of these are not the natural occupations in that sense. Whereas growing your food, doing arts and crafts, for your survival, your living, or doing services to one another, these are something that are very innate. You are born as a human, you have these skills in you. You will be doing it. You may do it a little more refined and so on, but then these are natural and of survival. They are survival skills. You cannot not have them. So it is only when you want to, like there was this question earlier, civilized. So it's only when you want to move into more complex things like, okay, I want to have money and I want to do this kind of trade and barter and derivatives and these kind of, additional complexities. That is when you have to undergo formal study. So to do that formal study, you would go to Gurukula. Otherwise, these kind of survival skills you learned from your parents. You did not really, your family taught you, your jati taught you this.
Your grandfather, uncle, aunt, your siblings.
So cousins. Your family, they've had some essential survival skill with them, which they would naturally pass on to you. So that is why these jatis were trade guilds. They were guilds fundamentally. People who owned certain skills. That is why if you see in Gujarat, if you go to some places in Gujarat, Rajasthan, they have those bandhani people who excel in that. In some places you have wood carving, and some places you have iron smithy. So these are crafts that people for survival, they developed and they passed it on to their children. But if you wanted additional things like I want to study about botany and zoology and chemistry and things like that, then you went to a Gurukula.
And do you know what's the name for botany in Indian text? It's called Vriksha Ayurveda. It's a full field for the Vriksha Ayurveda. And you got to
very interesting.
Study geology. It was called Bhugarbha. Garbha is womb. Bhu is earth. So you study something inside the womb of the earth. It was called Bhugarbha. So every field had a specialty. If you want to study agriculture, it was called Krishi Vijnana.
Krishi Vijnana.
So every field, not just Ayurveda. So you had Vriksha Ayurveda. Like the
so that is why they said that these people, whoever went and studied extra, were twice born because they developed one more additional layer of knowledge around them. It was nothing derogatory. And if you really look at it, see, today you're talking about Atmanirbharta, right? When do you get Atmanirbharta? Only if you are skilled with survival skills. So it is very essential that you have survival skills. So there was nothing, it was never in a derogatory sense that it is being painted about in present day.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So this brings me to my next question.
Somebody wants to come.
Yes, Vivekji, please go ahead.
Actually, coming to this derogatory sense, once Gurudev covered this, because quite a good number of texts, they say that, the Shudras have come from the feet. So he said, feet is just as important. Why do you have to feel so derogatory? When a holy man comes, you wash his feet, you don't wash his head. So it is not derogatory. So
who tends to the feet
of Vishnu? Who is at the feet of Vishnu sitting there? It's Lakshmi.
Correct.
So the wealth is in the feet. The wealth is there.
So the wealth of the land actually were held by the Shudra, the fourth category, and they were the masses and they held the wealth of the land. And this is documented by the British when they come to India itself. They have left the record saying the wealth, of course, they call them Sudurs. their way of writing it.
English way of writing in 1800s, 1700s. There's actually a person by name Alexander Walker who records it. And he was called the Butcher of Saurashtra. That's a sobriquet given to him because for 30 years he fought a war and then defeated all the Jadejas of Saurashtra and annexed it for the British. And he writes, it's documented by him. It is there in a book, U-Turn India, as well as in the book Breaking the Myths About Society. In two places we have mentioned him with the quote and the photo and all the data we've given. He says the land was owned by the Sudurs, and they were the most wealthy of the four Varna. It was the land because they had the produce and it was owned by them. The land was controlled by them. So the British, when they took away the land, they took it from the Sudras and whom they impoverished. Actually, the impoverishment of India was actually impoverishment of the Sudras, which is what we have said in our book Breaking the Myths about prosperity. That's a book we written. In that we very clearly said, so it is the brunt of the impoverishment was very unfortunately was borne by the Shudras of the land, who are the wealth producers of the land, who are the growers of the land, who are owners of the land really.
And that is what we have to now bring back with this Make in India spirit. So we have to make India a making land, a making civilization once again. The masses have to be engaged in making and servicing.
So it's a big scam then.
Great.
So it's a big scam actually. The narrative that the Shudras were every time oppressed is actually wrong. They were the richest.
They oppressed them.
See, that's what we written in the book. Please check out the book called Breaking the Myths. We have
Breaking the Myths.
Categorically with data we have quoted every bit. It's not just our opinion. We have quoted everything with points, data which was for the youth to use. We have done our research and we have placed it before you all in the public domain to use now.
This
Great.
knowledge should
Thank
go
you
to
so
as many
much.
people as possible actually. Otherwise, there's so much of wrong narrative out there.
Thank you so much, Vivekji. So my next question is that in your exploration across 30 countries, which are the other ancient civilizations which seem to draw inspiration from Bharatvarsha, and to what extent has it impacted their present society?
If you look at the word
It's
Arabia,
actually endless.
also see we have written books called Indo-Japan, a Connect Over Millennia. It's available both in English and Hindi.
Yes.
So that's we have spoken about it extensively there. We also written a book called Indo-Russia, a Connect Over Millennia.
Okay.
So you can, it's about 350 pages where we spoke about all the connects, including the word, which is the most common word, the name of a lady in Russia, Svetlana. Okay, even Stalin's daughter is called Svetlana, and there are many dancers and actors who are called Svetlana, right? The word Svetlana, Shvet, means white. Svetlana means white. It comes from the Sanskrit word Shvet. Right? Similarly, if you look at what is one of the great contributions of Russia to chemistry? Any of you studied chemistry in your 8th standard, 9th standard, 10th standard? Or you didn't study
I'm sure all
chemistry
of
then?
us have.
The periodic table, are you
All of us
referring to
have.
the periodic table?
Yes.
Are you referring
Who
to the
wrote it?
periodic table?
Yes.
Mendeleev.
Who wrote the periodic tables?
Mendeleev.
Yes, good. Where did he write it?
God alone knows.
Sitting by the Caspian Sea near Baku in Azerbaijan. And who were there living around? The rishis from India, from Kashmir and Afghanistan who are proficient in Shiv Sutra. So he got inspiration to draw the Mendeleev's table, the periodic tables from Shiv Sutra, which were recorded and given in our book, both in Indo-Russia and in Brand Bharat. It's one full chapter. How? So that's a big contribution of India. Without the Mendeleev's tables, periodic tables, you don't have much chemistry now. That comes from Shiv Sutra.
Oh,
And Ekam, Dvi uses those words. Those are very Indian Sanskrit words. Okay, Ekam, Dvi uses that. Okay, that's
And
one.
our book 2012, The Real Story, has a lot of details about the connect between India and ancient America. All the Mayan, Inca, Aztec, all the, I mean, there's so much of commonality. And the nicest thing is, they didn't go from the west. They actually approached it from the east of India. So they went via Pacific Ocean. So that was the route they take to go to Americas. And what are all the telltale signs you have along the route? All of that we have written in that book 2012. So you really see that India fundamentally, I think what we have to understand is the Indian civilization were navigational giants. The very word navigation has its root in the word Navgat.
Nav,
Nav,
Navy.
Navy.
The word Nova comes from the same word Nav.
And
Noah's Ark.
India with such a big force was just, ruling the seas. In fact, the king of the
Absolutely.
Malabar coast, he was actually called, now they call him, they use the word Zamorin, especially in context with Vasco da Gama. They'll say Vasco da Gama came and he met the Zamorin. He was actually Samuttirai.
I mean king.
King of the Samudra. And this side you had the Cholas. And even before that, Cholas were still just 1,000 years ago. You look at Sindh, even today, this is very, very touching. There is just one temple for Varuna. Very dilapidated. It is there in Sindh.
It is 40 kilometers to the west of Karachi. Totally in ruins today. The last 40 years.
And actually, if you see, much of these connects, you owe a lot to the people from Sindh. The Sindh region, Sindh meaning today's Sindh, that's a small place, but Sindh, Baluchistan, and that entire coast, they have done a lot of navigation, shipbuilding. So India has been and having contacts with so many civilizations over the seas.
We have written about this in a book called Brand Bharat, in a chapter called Navigation. Please check it out.
Made in India,
Made
first volume, has got a lot of these. The
Yes.
connects we have written books, but then how did these connects happen?
Yeah, I remember way back in 2010 when I attended my first advanced course, and you had come for a talk because that was a youth-oriented advanced course. I still remember how you explained about navigation, how Vasco da Gama, when he came, he was accompanied by the merchant ships. So all that is registered, and it's really something for us to become aware of all this knowledge. So we do have another little girl who's joined us from Himachal Pradesh, Aditi. Aditi, are you there? Yes, great. So Aditi also has some questions that she wishes to ask.
So sweet. Yes, Aditi. We cannot hear you, Aditi.
Aditi, you're not audible. Please check once. She's
Are
actually in
you
Shimla
mute?
and there's rain issue there.
Oh, it's raining. All right.
Yeah, because the weather is, like I said, no, Delhi we had double rainbows, so. I think due to this issue, let me ask Aditi's questions on her behalf. Aditi, I'm taking your permission to ask your question. Her question is, during the British rule, many invaluables of this country were seized by them. Is there any way we can reclaim those?
Do you want to answer
Which
about
one?
many valuables which were taken from India? Can we reclaim those?
Invaluables which were seized.
Yes. Yes. We have to do this. And there's a good friend of us who is working on this very well. It is called Bring Home the Gods. Because all the temple gods and all the sculptures were all looted from India. Literally, and taken en bloc. Literally en bloc, they're taken. And all the museums, as somebody said, are all chor bazaars. All the museums in England and different parts are all basically chor bazaars. And this is very obvious when you go to see a museum in any part of the world, especially West. They're all taken from some other civilization. Huge things you can see there. So, yes. Would you believe that some 200 years back, the British wanted to dismantle the Taj Mahal and take it to England.
Aditi, say yes.
Yes, Aditi, you have to put your audio on.
You're muted.
You're muted yourself. You're muted.
There.
There. Yes, Aditi.
No.
No, you again muted yourself. Yes, go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are
Very,
audible
very
now.
well.
Yes, you are.
Okay.
We can ask another question, Aditi.
So I wanted to ask that can we date Ramayana and Mahabharat using astronomical sightings mentioned in Itihasas? So it goes like the following. Krishna's visit before Kurukshetra war.
Krishna's visit as Pandav Duta. Yeah, actually, yes, Aditi. See, in the beginning, like we were saying, for Indian history, you have to rely on the two main texts of India, which are the two Itihasa, Valmiki Ramayana and Vyasa's Mahabharata. Obviously, even Vyasa wrote Jaya, which then has become Mahabharata. But these are the two originals you have to rely on. And in these, you will find that the authors have left behind a lot of information saying when this happened in the sky, the sun was here, Jupiter was there, and so on. Now, when you take all that, see, all these, we should understand that all these objects in the sky are very regular in their movement. You can always say how long it is going to take for the earth to go around the sun. But for us, how long it takes for the sun to go around in the sky from sunrise to sunset, the moon to move against the stars, and the planets to go from this zodiac to that zodiac, and so on and so forth. So, using all this information, you can, just like the way today when you send satellites or spacecraft to the space, to Mars and other planets, and for that you have to calculate where I have to send, where will Mars be. You have to do forward calculation. You can also do backward calculation with this, because these objects are moving with the same speed. You can do backward calculation. So using such kind of backward calculation, you can therefore say when such a configuration was there in the sky, that is when that particular event happened, the date would have been so many days behind. So today, if you are in 2020 and if it was 1,000 years ago, then you know it is 1020. If it is another 5,000 years ago, then you go back. It was 3020, like that. All right. So that is how we have to work, and we can date, and not only date using these, you can then corroborate with archaeological evidences. Today, you're getting a lot of archaeological evidences which date back to 5,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago. So many such artifacts are now coming up. Earlier, they had found only till 1,800 and so on. Now, slowly, we are getting more and more artifacts. So putting all of them together, then you can arrive at when Ramayana would have happened, when Mahabharata would have happened. So that was, Ramayana has happened some 7,100 years ago. Mahabharata happened 5,100 years ago. So they are our history. They did happen. And we are also able to give a date for them as according to today's modern Gregorian calendar, which is the English calendar. But all along, all these 7,000 years, we knew the dates as per our Indian calendar. We had no doubts. It's only 200 years ago, after the British came and they said, no, all these are just imaginary tales. And the people's mindset changed. They changed the mindset of the people, that we began doubting our calendar, doubting our history. So we lost that connect. So now we have to get back into the mindset, yes, this is our history. We can date them, and we can give you the dates both in Indian calendar and in Gregorian calendar. Right?
We have written 2 books on this.
Thank
to
you.
see that
2 series of books.
One is called Historical Rama, and the other is called Historical Krishna. So both books are available, published by the Art of Living. They are Bharat Gyan books. In both, we give specific dates of each of the events in both Rama's life and Krishna's life. You can check them out. Okay, and we also made films. There's a short film called Dating with Rama, similarly for Krishna. Okay, you can check them out in our YouTube channel.
Thank you.
We also
Thank you so much.
on both these, both on Rama and Krishna. You can check out the articles also. Okay.
Thanks.
And let me tell you see about all the artifacts taken out of India. There's a wonderful movement now called India Pride Project by a good friend in Singapore by name Anurag Saxena. He is efforting for the last decade and more in bringing back, in first of all, listing out all the artifacts that have been taken out of India and which museum they are, when did they go out, who took them out, and all that data. And now we are putting pressure to bring it back. Diplomatic pressure we are putting to bring back through the proper channels. And about this effort, we have written a chapter in our book called Knowing New India. It's a full chapter. You can read the chapter. And it's an effort that where each one of us can contribute on, because if you see one particular artifact in a particular museum and if you map it to a temple in India, then you can ask them back for it. Today, you can't just ask them back without mapping, because they will say, unless you give proof, how will they give it back? So each one of you, for example, there are many, if you are from Himachal, there are many invaluable statues from Himachal that have gone to different museums. Could be Melbourne, could be somewhere in Middle East, or could be somewhere in Europe, or could be in Americas, anywhere it could be. So to map it with that museum to that, it has gone. So it's a long effort. It's a painstaking effort. Once you do it, then they cannot deny giving it to you. And then you have to put pressure on diplomatic pressure on the government of India to get it back to your village. Each one of us, if we do it for our district or village, then we can work for a 10, 20, 30 years and bring it back in a lifetime back all to our original places. It's an effort. It's called India Pride Project. Each one of us should do our bit for it. There's also a film they made for this called The Blood Buddha. It's available on YouTube. You can see the film. Okay? Wonderful.
You. Thank you so much, Will.
Glad.
We'll share notes. We'll share notes of these invaluable insights that you have shared and share it with all the Parliament teams who are connected with us. We do have Bhagwan who has a very interesting question to ask. Bhagwan, please ask your question.
So I want to know that one side is Alexander the Great, who is depicted as victorious. On the other side is Chanakya, who is also shown as victorious. Who is the real story? What is the real story about that? And who was really victorious among the two?
Alexander and Chanakya did not meet each other. By the time Alexander left India, Chandragupta was only 8 years old. Okay, so he was not yet he was at best a prince. He was not a king. He became a king much later, and Chandragupta was a king from Patliputra, that is today's Patna, Bihar. Alexander at best came up to western Punjab. And then he was defeated by the local chieftain by name Pururava, and a lost and a wounded Alexander went down the Sindhu river and took a boat to go back to Babylon, because he didn't have the strength, or the army have the strength. A defeated army did not have the strength to walk back across Persia.
So your first bit itself was Alexander victorious. Was there itself? No, he was not victorious.
He was a defeated, wounded king, mortally wounded in battle against Pururava. We have said this very clearly in our book, Breaking. It's a full chapter on the way we have dealt with this. It was the brave soldiers of Punjab under the leadership of Pururava and his son who defeated the so-called Alexander the Great. A local chieftain defeated a king who had won half the known world then. Okay? That was a very decisive battle.
Actually, I would encourage you to read, since you're interested in this question. Please read that.
Okay.
We've also written about the sequence of events that have happened, which we have culled out from Western texts, very old Western texts themselves, and they do talk
contemporary to Alexander text. These are texts were contemporary to Alexander. This is pre-Jesus Christ text.
So they talk about what happened and how the battle was fought and what happened after the battle, how he left and everything.
It's all
So,
discussed very closely. You can
and
take it.
nowhere do they talk about Chandragupta.
So he was just
Okay.
8 years old and left Sindh by ships.
They do mention somewhere that after he comes to a certain point, he gets scared to penetrate further because he has heard about the mighty Nanda kings. And he says that, oh, even if this local chieftain is like this, then how do I ever manage to face the others? So only to that extent you find mention in those texts, which have actually, because see, Indian texts for us, Alexander doesn't even figure. I mean, he was hardly anything for Indian literature. So he doesn't figure anywhere in Indian literature works. So it's only from their side. And even there, you don't find mention of any Chanakya and Chandragupta.
See, for example, you have the Hunas, you have had Kanishka, many big people, many big kings come and attack India. It's all mentioned in our Purana and all our literature. We have no mention of Alexander in the Indian literature. It's all only in the Greek literature and later in the colonial literature, because at best it was a very minor raid. That's what it looks at. Actually, Nehru calls it a very minor raid in his book Discovery of India. That it was so minor that it did not warrant a mention in the Indian history books of those times.
You know, when
Okay,
this
this-
was
In
this-
comparison to the other major raids we've had.
Yeah, you know, actually, when this was blown up,
Yeah.
see, for a long time, this was even forgotten by West. It is only when the colonization happened and they needed a benchmark for India. So for
Okay.
the British, they wanted a benchmark to understand how far back can they go with respect to India in terms of their calendar. So the maximum they could go was that they didn't have any documented, not so much that they could find themselves. And the Rama and Krishna who went way back, for them, those kind of time scales were unimaginable.
Unimaginable.
Because one thing, you know, this Alexander date is a major, booth. It's like a booth savar on Indian history. The thing that happened was anything, they themselves write, anything that has happened before Alexander is
prehistoric.
Is prehistoric. I mean,
and it's not authentic. So they decided when history starts in India and before which
they
don't
call
history.
it barbaric. They call the Indian civilization barbaric before Alexander. And for them, they dismissed Rama and Krishna because when they came to India, the thought prevalent in their countries was the world, universe was created on 23rd October 4004 BC.
At 9 a.m.
BCE. BCE and BC are the same. Today you have to say BCE, not BC. Before Common Era, and you should say CE, Common Era, not AD. So for them, everything happened, universe itself started only in 4004. So how can you have Rama and Krishna, this particular
this land
civilization?
before the world was created? So that was the problem. Now all the theory is debunked. So they had a glass ceiling and a problem in their history. So they're imposing their imaginary problem onto Indian thought.
And if you actually think that in India we are having problems with our history books, actually in America, this particular date has not been erased from their books.
Still it is valid.
Still, they still have
We have
these
made
dates.
a short film on this 9 a.m. 23rd October 4004 BC. We made a short film. It's in our film series called Creation. You can see that 3-minute short film. We have shown the document also. So it's not, we don't have a problem. It's a European historians who have a problem. Because what we have said is, if you don't accept this date of 9 a.m. 23rd October 4004 BC, then you are a heretic. And heretic means you can be burnt on the stakes.
So the church there was so strong that they were forcing everybody
To accept that.
to accept this date, and those who were speaking against it would be burnt alive. So nobody in Europe would want to dare and stand up and say, no, look, there is India where their history goes back to 7,000 and 5,000, 7,000 years.
Because for them, you have history going back even before the earth was created. So that is a problem, really.
Right.
Whereas Alexander was something that they could relate to. So they said everything starts in India from Alexander time. Before that, everything
Okay.
was not history. So that is when they started
Very
blowing up
insightful.
Alexander, and then they had to show that Alexander was victorious and brought culture to India. Until then, India was barbaric.
How can you have a European coming to India and being defeated by Indians and then say he gave culture to India? So they have to make Alexander victorious to give culture to India.
Yeah.
So that is the problem. You can't
Right,
have a
absolutely.
European being lost to. So the moment you say an European lost to India, then the English rule itself in India becomes very unstable. The British rule in India becomes unstable. So you have to twist it round to say we are victorious. So they have to say one lie, they have to say 10 lies. So when you unpeel one lie, you start unpeeling 10 more lies, which we did 50 years back. Because you had a lot of other historians who were trying to add more peels of lies to it the last years after independence. So you have to start unpeeling each one of them. So this banana peel is not just with few peels, it's got layers of banana. This banana has got layers of peels you have to unpeel.
It's called onion. It's
Yeah,
called
yeah.
onion peels.
Yeah, same.
Good one. Thank you so much, Bhagwan. So Namya has one question that she's been holding on to for the longest time. Namya, please shoot.
Okay. So what is the difference between Janapadas and Mahajanapadas?
See, fundamentally, it is to do with size, okay?
Jana is people.
Yeah. So, I mean, Janapada means republic.
See, people. Jana is people. Pada is the feet. Padas, PODs, podos, as they say in Greek. Pada. So it is a footprint. It's a footprint of a group of people that they have. Okay? So that's a foot. So as she says, it's size. Go ahead.
So, what determines is fundamentally the size of the Janapada and
Okay.
how long has it been in existence, how long is its history. So these determine, and like they say, one thing, if you really look at the ethos of India, it has always been decentralization. Okay, we have had kings, but despite kings, the villages ruled themselves. So we have always been small things and aggregated. Okay, we were never one huge thing and breaking down, but small things going to make up a bigger thing. So in that sense, they would have been smaller village republics becoming larger than you have, and every village managed their own resources and shared a little bit with the central kingdom. So the king's job was to give protection and protect the culture and safety of all the people around him. But all the villages, they worked and they managed themselves and looked after themselves. So they were self-sufficient from those times itself. And then they would aggregate in many ways.
There is in two of our books. One is called U-Turn India. You can turn India around, and also about the decentralization, all this. And in our other book called Breaking the Myths about the Future from India. So 3 books you mentioned it. Please use it, okay? All this data is for youngsters like you to use. Okay, so Janapada is smaller in size. Mahajanapada is larger in size. It's like Rishi, Maharishi. Okay, so it's one more unit. So Panchayat, Janapada, Mahajanapada.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Aditi, you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to ask that why don't we worship Khandit idols or Vigrahas? Why don't we
They're asking
worship Khandit Vigrahas?
Khandit idols, the idols which are broken. Why we don't worship them? That's okay.
Khanda, okay.
Okay, since you're from, I'll tell you what. Since you're from, see, this is a okay, Khandit idols. Got it. Okay, fine. See, in many temples we have broken idols still in worship. One classic example is the Vigraha Murti in Badrinath. It is Khandit. Okay, it is Bimba, as they also use the word Bimba. It's slightly broken. Okay, when Adi Shankara was taking a bath in Badrinath on the banks of the Alaknanda River 2500 years ago, he got this idol in his hand and he saw that it was damaged. So he left it back in the river. He continued bathing. This idol came back to his hands. Again, he saw this idol. Again, it was damaged. So he left it back in the waters. A third time, the same idol came back into his hands in the swirling waters. So what did he realize? That this, even though it is Bimba, Kandit, okay, the divine wanted him to consecrate this Murti Vigraha. So he takes this Murti Vigraha and consecrates it, and today that is what you have, the Badrinath shrine there. You have this sort of thing in many parts of India.
Yeah, but it is right. I mean, ideally, you're not supposed to use a Kandit idol. First, you should understand why we are using idols. Murti Puja. Why do we do Murti Puja? Why do we have Vigraha? Their name itself, we call them Vigraha. Okay, so what are these Vigraha? Why do we
Graha.
go? See,
Graha, Vigraha.
See, we are a civilization where we have known that there is Brahman, and this is all pervading. So why have we also done Murti Puja? Okay, so we have written about this right now. It is on the website. There is a book called Swami Ayyappa, Understanding Swami Ayyappa. You can read it on our website. It is there available. There is a full chapter on Vigraha. Okay, in short, what it means, see, look at the word Vigraha. So Graha means to take. Okay, now this Vigraha are objects. See, what do you do when you go, in Indian concept, we don't pray. Okay, what do we do when we go to temple? What do the priests do? They do archana, they do stuti, correct? You sing the praise of Bhagwan. You say, you're so like this, you're so beautiful, you're wearing this earring, you've got this bangle, all that, right? You're wearing this necklace, or you have done this, you're associated with this big, great event, you killed that demon, so you're so great. You don't have anything saying. There are for obtaining certain boons, benefits. That apart, when you go to a temple, you are supposed to sing the praise of that Murti. And each temple Murti is designed by a Vishwakarma, who is the sculptor, the Stapati.
Kar to do Vishwa world, Vishwakarma, the one who creates your world.
So this Stapati, actually, he gets into meditation, and the Murti that he gets, the imagery he gets, is what he sculpts for you. And the idea is, every time you go there, you sing these praises, which this Murti will grahan, will take. It will take all these positive thoughts, and also all the positive thoughts in that sanctified space where the temple is.
All the music, all the dundubi, all the nada, everything it takes in.
All the Veda, the chanting,
Mantra.
and everything, mantra chanting, and also the location of the place. I mean, the place where the temple is located.
It's like a conductor.
So it captures all of this. And that is why when you are having a depression, like you're in a bad mood, and then they say you go to the temple and you will get all these energies back from the idol, right? So in that sense, when you look at an idol, now suppose it is broken and all that, you will not be able to praise it very heartily. Wahan jaake you will have very sad thoughts. Oh, look at this idol, it's got broken. Your positivity first will not come out entirely from within you. So these kind of things, to avoid it, you therefore make sure that the idols are
Purna, wholesome. And many temples have a side idols which are bimba. So they don't throw them away. They keep either leave it in the sea or in the river, or they keep it to the side. Inside the Garbhagriha or one of the other mandirs, they keep it. Okay, because it's a Purna idol. So like this, many temples have got multiple idols. Okay, that is there. Many temples have multiple idols. That's the reason. Because it has not become old due to regular abhishek, because of wear and tear, weathering, time breaking, repairs, many reasons. Okay.
actually we have in the Vastu Shastra, experts will talk about various ways in which you can repair. To what extent should you repair an idol? Up to what level can you repair and keep it, and when should you replace it? How should you re-energize a temple?
There's all sciences for it. It's all mentioned in our book Ayyappa. You can read that. It's for free read in our website on the top mastheads. You can click the book. and read the book in our website. Okay? Next, please. Thank you, Aditi.
Sir, I have a
Great, Thank you.
I have a follow-up question for you. You said that Krishna was 5,000 years old and Rama was 7,000 years old. Huh. That many years back, right? Approximately. But I have read somewhere that recently that the pyramids themselves are conservative estimate is that they are 13,000 years old. So it doesn't match up in my mind, right?
What does the word pyramid mean?
What does the word pyramid mean?
Fire, mid, M-I-D, mid. Fire comes from the fire. It's a Greek word. The word pyramid itself is only 400 years old, 300, 400 years old. You didn't have the word pyramids before that. What is a pharaonic word? Pharaoh's pharaonic word. The pharaohs ruled Egypt. What is a
The
pharaonic?
native Egyptian word.
The native land of Egypt is called Misr, M-S-R, Misr. What is the Misr word or the pharaonic word for pyramids? It's called Mru, M-R-U, Mru. Mru comes from Meru.
I see.
Sumeru. There is a full chapter in our book, Brand Bharat, about Meru, Sumeru pyramids. And we have been to the pyramids in different parts of the world. The largest pyramids are not in Egypt, but they are in Bosnia. Okay? And in any land, if there are more pyramids in Central America than in Egypt, the highest pyramids are in Turkey. They're called tumulus there. That's again a local name, English name, tumulus. So we have written about, and there are pyramids in Micronesia, Polynesia, Thailand, China, Russia, Africa, Sudan, Japan, India. We have covered all these pyramids in Northeast India. So we've covered all these things. Okay, so it is a full chapter in our book, Brand Bharat, on pyramids. And we've also made a presentation at Visalakshi Mandap in the ashram last year on pyramids. The world over, that full film is available on YouTube in our channel on Meru pyramids. You can check that out. There are about, we listed them all out and we made a full film. It's there. We made a presentation of this in VM last year. That you can for previewing.
So my question was, given that the pyramids are 13,000 years old, wouldn't Rama and Krishna be much older than that? How do we say that it's just
Rama is 7,100 years old. Krishna is 5,100 years old. There were many generations that lived before Rama. So if you look at the tree of which was shown, the family tree of Rama, it goes for many generations before his time. He is not the originator of his what do you call Ikshvaku dynasty. Ikshvaku dynasty goes back many generations before him. Before him goes to Kashyapa at all his time, and all the pharaohs of Egypt who built it. What is their name? What's the names of the pharaohs? Ramasa. Ramses is English word. Ramses is an English word. English word. Go by the original word. Rama. The sir is added by the Greeks. Rama is our original word.
Okay.
In our book Ayodhya War and Peace, and also in a short film, we have shown how the connection between the Surya Vamsa and the Rama of Egypt. Their names only Rama. All the pharaohs are Rama. Ramses 1, Ramses 2, Ramses 3, Ramses 12, Ramses 14, Ramses 17. All the Ramses. Ramses is again a very English word. Strip off the English word as you take out the layers of the onion. Then you go to the Greek word, Ramasa. Take out the Greek word. What's the Egyptian word? Rama. And who are they belong to? They all belong to the solar dynasty.
Ra.
Yes.
Ra is
Sun
Ravi's son.
worshippers.
And,
Right,
and Rama also belongs to the Surya Vamsa.
Correct.
Got it?
Interesting, sir.
Thank you so much.
Very interesting.
We are already overstretched on time. So we have one last question, which is a very important message that we wanted to share with all the children. So Bhagwan is going to ask that question himself. Bhagwan, over to you.
So I wanted to know that how can children of today inculcate the fundamental skills to be a researcher or scholar like yourself? What 5 habits would you recommend them to imbibe in their lifestyle?
Good question. Bhagwan, nice. See, we have done this for 20 plus years. before that as Bharatya, before that on our own. So from your young age, I'm glad you're interested now itself to sort of understand about India, and you have all this content with a variety of scholars, not just Bharatya. You're welcome to start reading every day a little bit. See something on YouTube every day. Because when we started 20 years back, you did not have Google, you did not have YouTube, none of these you had.
And you did not have so much of work published either.
Those
The
days.
ecosystem was very different. Today, you're very fortunate that you can, one, you have the medium of access, and two, there are enough number of people who are writing from the Indic perspective. So you are that much more advantaged to be able to take this kind of work, follow it up further, and go ahead.
See, for example, if you look at the work what we've done called Autobiography of India as the books were written, 35 books is published physically as paperbacks, and another 65 as mini books available for free read in our website. So Autobiography of India has 100 volumes for you all to use. And films that we have made 300 plus short films in English, Hindi, Kannada, Telugu, and other languages. Okay. So, and we also written articles, 600 plus articles.
Okay. Now that
Use
is
them. It's for you to use.
so that is one thing
that's
on
great.
what you have to do as an effort. Okay. But now about the mindset. All right. See, you
Yeah.
have to understand that the world, I mean, this is said in Ishavasya Upanishad itself, that creation has to be approached from both science and spiritual angle. Okay, they talk about it as Vidya and Avidya. So Vidya is what it really is. Avidya is the kind of perceptions that it throws up. So you have, so what really exists has to be understood from the perceptions as well as from the Vidya part of. So you have to cultivate both scientific knowledge as well as open your mind to from the spiritual angle also. Because even in modern science, they say that only about 4% of the universe is known and is solid matter. 96% of the universe in the sense that they can account for. They don't know in what form it is.
So Stula Sukshma.
So imagine there
You have
is
to know the
bulk of it which is more spiritual than actually physical.
So all hollow and empty. So you know what is hollow and empty.
Yeah.
So that
You see.
you
Okay.
have to, and Indian civilization knowledge has been written, all the literature that we have has been written from both these perspectives. So you cannot understand it properly if you do only from one perspective. So even if you're talking about history, or even if you're talking about physics or biology texts or Ayurveda texts, you have to understand it from both these sides. And one of the nice way to develop this, of course, is to do all the sadhana and meditation and yoga. The other beautiful thing you can do, which you should cultivate, is looking at the skies, astronomy.
Yeah,
There is nothing like astronomy to widen your horizon, your vision, your thoughts, and bring all good qualities in you, like humility, wonder, awe, all of which actually are needed. You need to wonder. Okay. And the more you keep wondering, the more childlike you will be.
And actually, we have done 31 short films called Wonders of Indian Astronomy. It's in our website, in our YouTube channel. Please see them. The 31 short
sure,
films.
sure.
Okay, so you'll get the whole perspective. And what she spoke about Ishavasya Upanishad, that is also we made into a short film. It's in our playlist called Creation. Go there, pick it up from there. It's a last film. See that. And apart from that, it's also in our book called Creation. The last 4 pages deals only with this aspect. Explained with animation, with pictures, whole perspective. We have put it in public domain, use it.
Yeah.
Yeah. This,
Okay.
the knowledge is enormous.
We have now given you a world of things to do.
Yeah.
Now you can go and
Okay,
study,
sure.
Bhagwan.
Yeah. We'll enjoy these holidays.
Encourage you should social with your friends. So they will think you are
Yeah,
knowledgeable.
sure.
You're Bhagwan. They will think you're not. It's not only your name is Bhagwan, you're only Bhagwan. They're not thinking. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
And Malhotra. Okay, there are different hotras. You know, there's Salihotra, Malhotra. There are many Hotras. Okay? Good.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Vivek ji has one other question, and actually we have few questions from the.
Yes, yes.
We do have few questions from the comments also.
Go ahead.
Vivek bhai, over to you.
So I just wanted to know, sir, are we living in a universe or a multiverse? You know, Interstellar and other movies mention of other dimensions, parallel universes. You know, do we have any references to this?
What does the word universe mean? University, universe, unique code, single. Okay, that's a name given by some people some couple of centuries ago. What do we call it in Indian thought?
Brahmand.
We call it Brahman.
Yeah, Brahmand is good. Yes, Brahmand is Brah means to expand, grow. Brihan Mumbai, Brihad Ishwar, Brihad Samhita, to grow, expand, huge,
Greater.
Brihad. Okay?
Brihaspati for Jupiter, the largest one.
That is all Brihan. Okay. Then what's the actual name we give for universe?
I mean, more than universe, for creation,
Creation, we give that name.
we call it
Srishti.
Prapanch.
Srishti Srijan.
And
We call it-
Prapancha, that which is made of the special five, the 5 elements.
Prapancha.
So that is one. That is how we have looked at creation. And actually, to answer your universe and multiverse, the very clue lies in 2 things that come to my mind. One is you normally, how do you praise God? You will say Akhilanda, we'll all very quickly say Akhilanda Koti Brahmanda, like that. Very fast you'll say. But you break it down, it is Akhila Anda Koti Brahmanda Nayaka. So Akhila Anda Koti Brahmanda. So they are talking about Koti, so many Brahmanda.
Got one Brahmanda.
So that is one. And then the
So
other.
all the Andas, Koti Brahmanda. So I'm talking about multiverse or multiple multiverses. Multiverses.
And
Koti.
you know what? And we haven't even, like I said, 96% we don't know. So how are we going to know about the multiverses? So that is point. And the other very nice corroboration comes from the story of Krishna, right? Where so many Brahmas come. So, and then they
Yes.
subjugate, bow down to Krishna.
Not one. The
There
Brahma
was
is
no
not
one
one.
Brahma.
The word BRH, Brah, means bro.
So
Okay.
there is a
Recently,
lot of clues there. That is the beauty. I think that is for the generation like Bhagwan, who have to, and even Aditi and Namya and these kind of youngsters who have to now. This is something very important, Bhagwan, that you have to do. You asked what are the 5 things, right? I think it's very important that children of today learn Sanskrit, and more importantly, from the angle of understanding the way the words are formed,
roots,
the
Bija.
roots, and what they
Okay.
so that you can go to the various shastra. I mean, one is you learn Sanskrit. So far, all these years, we have been learning Sanskrit and focusing more on literary work,
Shlokas.
where we have various poetries, kavyas we have been reading. That has been the main focus, while the shastra and various other scientific treatises were left only to the pandits. Pandits meaning the religious kind of pandits. Whereas I think now we have to start learning Sanskrit from this perspective of looking for the sciences that the words convey. That's the beauty of Sanskrit. Every word conveys a functionality, a characteristic. It has a meaning, and the meaning that is tied to the sciences. So once you pick this up, you will be able to get to all these nuances from the Indian texts, and we can break a lot of glass ceilings. So that is something that you guys must do.
We have said all this in the book.
Sure.
From India, check it out. You have all the clues there.
Yeah, sure.
Always
We'll
follow
do
us.
that.
DM us, we'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, Sagar.
Okay. Thank you so much, Vivek Bhaiya and Bhagwan, for asking these insightful questions. I would like to So I would like to thank you, both of you, on behalf of everyone who has joined in as part of the Art of Living Children and Teens Desk. It has been really an insightful interaction. And personally, myself, I spend a lot of time with children, especially traveling around the country as well and taking them around the country. So I feel with whatever you have shared, and we are able to bring this into our interaction, our activities, and there is a lot more that we can really learn. So thank you so much. We will in fact make a note of all that you have shared and share it with our team. And we will definitely seek your time again for another interaction and perhaps turn this into another set of series, right?
Sure.
Because I feel children and teen really need to be nurtured, and with your expert guidance, we'll be able to do it very well. So thank you so
It was
much.
our
Very
pleasure
grateful to
that
both
we
of
could,
you. Right.
It is our pleasure too that we got an opportunity to take this to the children. Thank you. Jai Gurudev.
Absolutely. Thank you. Jai Gurudev. Wish you good night.
Jai Gurudev.